Dynasty Warriors Origins. This game is getting a lot of hype. And rightfully so, as it is being often touted as one of the better recent entries in the long-running Dynasty Warriors series. And as someone who very much loves the Samurai Warriors series, this game has been hard to ignore. If you didn't know, Samurai Warriors is the sister series to the much more popular and long-running Dynasty Warriors series. While the Samurai Warriors series is of course set during the height of the Sengoku period, Japan's age of warring states, Dynasty Warriors is instead set in ancient China during the famous Three Kingdoms period. These games feature large, epic battles which see you take on thousands of enemy soldiers while playing as iconic and historic figures, wielding legendary weapons and unleashing devastating attacks. And while some people have labeled these games as brainless hack and slash, in reality they have tremendous depth and complexity for those who dig deep into what they have to offer. I got my start obviously with the Samurai Warriors series, a series I have made several videos about in the past. They are some of my favorite games of all time, especially that of Samurai Warriors 2: Empires. Yet, interestingly enough, until now, I have never actually owned a Dynasty Warriors game. Although I very much find ancient China to be a fascinating topic, when it comes to games, I have just never felt the urge to drift away from the Samurai Warriors series. I have no real connection to the story or characters within Dynasty Warriors, and of course I care much more for that within the Sengoku period of Japan. But like I said, Dynasty Warriors Origins had me curious because the trailers looked pretty great, and I am always interested to see what the Dynasty Warriors series does that Samurai Warriors could also implement. Now, I was fortunate enough to have Koei Tecmo send me a copy of the game to play on PS5, so a big thank you to them. This video will be my thoughts on the game, what I like, don't like, and hope they will bring over to the next Samurai Warriors game. This video will not be a typical review, however, but instead just my own thoughts and comparisons. If you want to watch content about Dynasty Warriors Origins from someone who is much more invested and knowledgeable about the Dynasty Warriors series, I highly recommend you check out this video from Chris Gildert, which I will link down below. Additionally, I should mention that because I am not as familiar with the Dynasty Warriors series, there may be parts of the gameplay here which I think are new, but may have actually been added in a more recent title that I just didn't realize. As I stated before, my experience is just with the Samurai Warriors series, so I'm going off of what I know from those games. Lastly, at the time of recording this video, I have not completed the game yet, but instead have just finished the first chapter. Now, I have sunk a good number of hours into it and have played through several major battles and a bunch of side skirmishes. Besides later story content, I think I have a pretty good idea about what features this game brings to the table. So, with that said, I hope you enjoy. Now, if you are even remotely familiar with the Warriors series, be it Dynasty Warriors, Samurai Warriors, or any of the other Warriors offshoot titles, you know that the main feature of these games are massive, epic battles featuring hundreds to thousands of soldiers, with your hero character taking charge to lead your side to victory. And oh my god, do the battles in Dynasty Warriors Origins look good. This is by far the best looking Warriors game visually to date. The graphics during each battle are phenomenal. They are gritty, jam-packed with soldiers, and give you everything you could hope for thematically from each major clash. Towering walls and castles, fluttering banners, hundreds of warriors charging or marching in organized formation, a heavy cover of grime and dust which permeates the air, and with a size and scale unlike any other. This is incredible, and I know that I haven't even seen some of the biggest battles yet that this game has to offer, especially after watching Chris's video and seeing what some of the later battles look like. It's mind-blowing. I vastly prefer this level of detail and realism to what they did in Samurai Warriors 5, where they instead took the approach of making things look more artistic and painted, but just came off looking cartoony at times. I can only imagine what some of the greatest clashes of the Sengoku period would look like in this style. It would be epic. Combat 2 feels really fresh. It is odd not having the dash attacks from Samurai Warriors 4 and 5 that I have gotten used to spamming, But this slower pace leads to the buildup of more combos and unique encounters that feel quite good. Every unit, be it named characters, higher ranking officers, or just nameless ground troops, feel like a legitimate threat that you need to find the best way to deal with. And this leads to much more depth than ever before, as combat is at its most engaging for a Warriors game. Now you need to utilize more dodges and parries, along with the new battle arts and more to defeat your foes. And on top of that, there are even special event encounters like large force concentrations, which will make it even more challenging. Almost everything about the battles and combat in this game feel like a major step in the right direction, and I could not be more happy. Which means I am then also super excited to see what they can do with this system in a Samurai Warriors game. What would this all look like in Japan's Sengoku period? However, while so much about the battles and combat is tremendous, there are some other details regarding the presentation and functionality that I am not the biggest fan of. Now, granted, these are probably not major gripes to all of you, but they are things I have been seeing changing for the worse over the years with each new installment of Samurai Warriors, and they are at their most lazy here, in my opinion. And lazy choices like this tend to break my immersion the most, especially when everything else feels so solid. So what do I mean? Well, one is where routed troops flee. In older games, there were actually exit zones for where routed troops would leave the battlefield. In fact, in Samurai Warriors 2, you had to actually kill their officer for them to flee. And the only way you knew which soldier was their officer was by memorizing what they looked like for each class. Yet now in Dynasty Warriors Origins, fleeing units just take a couple of steps before fading away into thin air. Granted, I know they don't add anything to the battle as they flee, but just, serve to help you continue to pump up your KO number, but it feels lazy to watch them poof away into nothing when before they actually had to leave the battlefield. What is also interesting is that while there are no exit zones for fleeing soldiers, there are entry zones for incoming soldiers. And in the past, there were instances where entry zones also served as exit zones, so it would not have been that big of a deal to just make that the case in this game. I don't know, it just feels strange. It might be because of the game engine and it's easier to get rid of troops on the battlefield quicker for the graphics or whatnot, but I don't know, it doesn't look good and it does break my immersion. Another detail I'm not happy about and one I've gotten quite tired of is the modern base capturing mechanics. This complaint is one which is more rooted in the Empire's titles, but somehow it found its way into this game too. To capture bases in Dynasty Warriors Origins and other more recent Empire's titles, you have to keep killing enemy soldiers within an area to drain a health bar that the base has. On top of this, you also have to defeat any named enemy officers that are at the base as well before it can fall. And as you do this, new enemies will keep running in and flooding the area as the health bar falls, so you don't really ever get a sense that you are actually whittling it down visually besides just the health bar draining. It's just tedious and mindless at this point. Whereas in older games, you actually had base and supply captains who would be unit leaders you would have to defeat several of in order to capture the base. There was no health bar, it was just the commanders there who you needed to take down for the base to fall under your control. This made capturing bases feel much more strategic as you took down these captains rather than the arcadey feeling of just draining the health bar. In fact, the old captains could even go around and capture other bases, which made them feel like actual ground units engaging in the battle rather than just leaving it all up to the hero characters running around the map. This meant that you needed to make sure that bases were well manned with captains before leaving them, otherwise they might fall prey more easily to an enemy assault. Now once again, these two issues are nothing major, and I know I am probably in the minority when I raise these complaints. But they are important to me because they seem like significant steps backward in how battles actually feel. So, for Samurai Warriors 6 and hopefully a Samurai Warriors 6 Empires, Koei, if you're watching, please bring back base captains and exit zones. I doubt the majority of players care too much either way, so I bet it would be an easy thing to re-implement. The only other gripe I have about the battles is something that I don't know if it is a staple throughout more battles or if it is just something in Chapter 1 and has to do with fighting the Yellow Turbans. But this has to do with the use of sorcery in battles. Never before in any Warriors game I've played has sorcery been a large component of battles and something you have to deal with before advancing on in the stage. Now, I know certain characters can tend to have what appears to be magical attacks, characters like Kurota Kanbei, for example, but this just relates to how they fight and is not a major mechanic in the overall battle. However, in Dynasty Warriors Origins, there are instances where the battle comes to a screeching halt because you detect magic being used and have to hunt down and destroy massive objects which are allowing the sorcery to be used. I am really not a fan of this, and I hope it's just a thing with the yellow turbans. I know these games are not meant to fully represent history because obviously they are super over the top and often take heavy liberties with the history that is being portrayed, yet putting in full magic in the battles and in a way that feels like a distraction from the battle itself is something I am not a big fan of at all. But with that all said, while I did have presentation and immersion issues with those several elements, there are other areas where I think the presentation and immersion did quite well, and both come before and potentially after battles. It is here where the pre-battle war councils shine quite significantly. Instead of just a picture of the map with your menu before a battle, you now have a full layout given by your commanders of what the plan is, where other generals are, and what is at stake. It has such a great feel to it as you are increasingly hyped up for the coming clash and get a picture of what is to come. Please keep these war councils in for future Warriors games. They are awesome. On the other side of this, if you lose a battle for one reason or another, there is also a cool information screen which shows you all the movements and actions you took throughout the battle to see where you messed up. And once you determine a new plan for yourself, you can choose to jump back into the battle and restart from any point you want. This is such a cool feature which has the ability to remove a ton of potential headaches in tougher battles. But I will say this, while on paper I do really like this feature, it does remove some of the risk/reward and feeling of accomplishment. Whereas before, if you lost a battle, you would have to restart the battle completely. Now you are just able to jump back in perhaps only a couple of minutes back. It is probably more of a player preference thing if you care about this or not. I would say maybe only allowing this feature on lower difficulties to even out the experience. Just an idea. But moving past the battles, how is the rest of the game? What is the story like and other world aspects? In this game, you play as a wandering warrior who you get to name, but do very little else to customize. To be honest, I don't really like this at all. If you are going to give players a self-insert character with dialogue options and other RPG elements like leveling up your skills and being able to change your weapon, I wish we could also customize the character's appearance. I'm not a fan of how the character looks, and I wish we could just change up the appearance a bit. Character customization in Warriors games is not a new thing, so why wouldn't we be able to do that here? In fact, before the game came out, I was actually under the impression that you could customize your character, so I was surprised when I learned that you in fact cannot. As for who your character is, well, it's a bit hard to figure out in the early game, obviously. You are not sure about your past, but you keep having strange visions, and come to find another person who does know about who you are. But really, it's up to you to decide through dialogue what you are fighting for. This is at least what I have gathered from the first chapter. As for the rest of your character's story and past, I can only imagine it gets revealed to you throughout the rest of the game. Yet, I have to say, so far I am not invested in the story at all. I don't care about him, likely because I didn't get to create him myself, and the story just seems a bit too weird right now to get invested in. Perhaps that will change as I play through more of the game. As for the concept itself, though, of playing as a custom character throughout the story of the game, this is something I actually do really like. All the way back when I made a speculation video when Samurai Warriors 5 was first announced, I made a comment about how I hoped that there would be a way to insert custom characters into the story and have them interact with other major real historical figures. So that idea is really cool to see brought over here. I just wish it was a bit more my own and less handed to me on rails. As for how the story progresses, there is a wide open map of China for you to explore as you work your way through each province. And while this is cool to give you an overall scale of what is going on as you traverse the world and bring peace to the land, it also leaves out certain things, like being able to simply walk around a city or explore villages and cool-looking areas. It's like, imagine you are playing Mount and Blade, but the only time you're able to see your character would be in battles and never around town or in castles or anywhere else. I do get why they did this, and I think there is merit to it, but I think it also misses out on the little moments and just more general exploration and immersion. For example, in Samurai Warriors Spirit of Sanada, another somewhat open-world Warriors game, you get to run around and explore a ton of settings. From towns, to castles, to villages, to large cities, to backroads, each with their fair bit to see and do. I wish they would have carried concepts like this over a bit more. But, overall, these are my takeaways so far with Dynasty Warriors Origins. I do think it is a very fun game, and leaves me a lot to think about in terms of what I'd like to see in the next Samurai Warriors game. And I know as I play through more of it, there will likely be even more elements that will jump out at me. But at least with what I have played through so far, these were my thoughts. So, to finish off, let's make a list here, just to recap what I think the best features are that I saw, and what I'd like to see them bring over to Samurai Warriors. Number 1, the battles and combat. Bring over almost everything from the battles and combat. Visually, they are fantastic and refreshing, and the actual combat is super well put together and engaging like never before. The only things I ask for is to bring back exit zones for routing units and base captains for bases and not health bars, and to tone down the sorcery stuff. Number 2, the pre-battle war councils. These are incredible. Carry these over as well. They do so much for immersion, storytelling, and yes, the planning itself. Number 3, the defeat replay system. This one is cool, and I'd love to see it brought over as well, but perhaps it should only be allowed, like I said earlier, on easier difficulties. And number 4, custom characters being involved in the main story with RPG mechanics. On paper, this is a great concept. I just wish it was handled a little bit better. This is something I would love to see fully improved further and brought over with more freedom at your fingertips. So, with that all said, once again, these are the things I really want to see brought over into the next Samurai Warriors game. But there is one last thing I do want to touch on, and the reason why I'm bringing this up last and after talking about all the other things is because it doesn't really have much to do with the story and gameplay, but is instead about replay value. In older Warriors games, it just felt like there was more modes, more to do, more they put into them. And even when there weren't a ton of modes, at least there was also an Empires release. I've said it before and I'll say it again, Empires games are my absolute favorite in the series, and I was bummed to see that Samurai Warriors 5 did not get an Empires release, as well as having very little side content. There is a reason I haven't really returned to Samurai Warriors 5, while I have returned quite a bit to Samurai Warriors 2 and 4. Those games just have more content in both their main titles and Empires editions, and from what I can tell, outside of the main story mode in Dynasty Warriors Origins, there is nothing else to do. I have heard there is a way to replay battles and chapters once you finish the story, but is that it for replay value? Or are you just supposed to start again on a harder difficulty? It just feels like there is not a lot there when there used to be way more in older Warriors games. And on top of that, if they were to do an Empires title for Origins, I'm also unsure how they would do it, given that the only character we really experience the story of all the way through is that of your custom character. At least in other Warriors games, we tend to see the story from multiple perspectives. Here, I'm just not sure how that would work for an Empires game, unless your custom character is just treated like a normal officer like everyone else, which I guess would work. I don't know, it just leaves a lot to be thought about. The biggest thing, and I know this is going off on a bit of a tangent, but the biggest thing in terms of the Empires series that I want Koei to know, if anyone from Koei is watching right now, is that I hope you don't give up on Empires titles in general, as they are such a unique gaming experience and widely beloved by the fanbase. Anyways, that is really all I have to say about that. Would I recommend Dynasty Warriors Origins given what I've played so far? Yes. Absolutely. It is a very fun game if you are either a fan of the series already or a fan of the history behind it. or if it just looks even remotely appealing, it is a good time, and I'm glad to see it is doing well with fans. However, as you know, my heart will always be with Samurai Warriors. With that all said, thank you for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell if you enjoyed this video and found it to be most interesting.